we're delighted to have Richard LENNY be our next presenter. Rick has served as a non-executive chairman of Information Resources Incorporated, a privately held producer of market and shopper information, and certainly a name that's known to marketing academics as well as practitioners. But I think his heart really is in his work is more than 3 decades of experience in the consumer packaged good arena. He was chairman and president and chief executive officer of the Hershey Company. He was president of the Nabisco Biscuit Company, president of Pillsbury North America. Before that, it was 18 years in Kraft, where he held a number of senior marketing and sales positions. I think it's tough to find someone with more experience in CPG than Rick. Currently, he serves on the board of directors of McDonald's Corporations, Discover Financial Services, and ConAgra Foods. Other achievements include being named the Brand Week's Marketer of the Year, Barron's list of the 30 most respected CEOs, Institutional Investor Magazine's Best CEOs in America, and Food Processing Magazine's list of 11 most influential people in the food industry. Rick earned an MBA from Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management, a bachelor's degree in marketing from Georgia State University, but we also know you have deep ties with Notre Dame and appreciate you.
And a bunch of them right there in that first row. So those aren't all our kids, though. Thank you, Jim. Good morning. Well, those were 2 very good presentations in the panel discussion beforehand. We'll see if we can make it a trifecta. Terrific combination, leadership and marketing, and that's what this is all about. I hope to impart some of the thoughts as to why those 2 go hand in hand. My presentation is going to have 3 sections. First, I'm going to talk about some of the challenges facing the CPG industry. As Tim said, that's where I've spent my entire career, but the challenges facing that industry, I think, are applicable to other industries as well. Secondly, talk about the role of the CMO and his or her relationship with their CEO, and particularly the CMO's influence and impact on new products and brand building in particular. And that came through loud and clear in the previous panel discussion. And the last topic is the secret ingredient to all of your career success, and that's leadership. So why don't we get started with a bit of a historical perspective. These were the 30 companies that comprised the Dow Jones Industrial Average 20 years ago. What do you see when you see the companies right there? What are some of the companies? It's audience participation for the first 4 slides, then I'm on my own. Let's go, come on. What do you see? Woolworths. All right, so you see companies, but what type of companies? It's old economy, right? Industry, get it? That's where the name came from, Dow Jones Industrial Average. So over the ensuing 20 years, about half of the companies were dropped from the Dow Jones Industrial Average. I can assure you that it wasn't part of their strategic plan and it wasn't part of their boardroom deliberations to get dropped from the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Think about that. These are the 30 that comprise the Dow Jones today. What do you see up there now? Tech, what else? Consumer, retail, services. Now, for those of you early on in your career or starting out your career, which of these companies won't be there in 5, 10, or 20 years' time? Think about that. And are they thinking about what it takes to stay there? So what's the one word that best characterizes what is required to stay at the top of your industry? Or if you're a brand marketer, at the top of your category, keep your brand at the top. What's the one word? I'm sorry? Close? Who said relevance? You obviously looked ahead. Or you might have seen this no, I'm teasing. All right, and that's exactly what, and that's interesting, and that's a nice little word, and it came up in the panel discussion as well, and we all talk about relevance, but here's a way to think about relevance. It's the ability to deliver a superior value proposition to multiple stakeholders. Think about that if you have a brand or a platform or a portfolio. Ability to deliver a superior value proposition. That's interesting. The hard part is the multiple stakeholders. 15 or 20 years ago, there were really 2 essential stakeholders, consumers and customers. Now let's layer on top of that suppliers, employees, investors, special interest groups, communities in which we work. If you think about the people who spoke to you earlier this morning, think of all of their stakeholders and how to remain relevant with each of those. That becomes the challenge. Let's look at what's facing the CPG industry. And maybe 5 years ago, we would have said it was a crossroads. 10 years ago, here's some reasons to think why it's at one now, and also how this applies to other industries as well. This is the weakest post-recession recovery since the end of World War II. This shows GDP growth rate for each of the bars is the growth rate following the most recent recession. So look, it says 2.1% growth 2009 to 2016. I think we're going to come in at under 2% for 2016 in terms of GDP growth. Think of how hard it is to grow your business given the macroeconomic situation. Now, for the food and beverage industry, which is obviously large, look at this. This chart shows real volume growth. So it strips out pricing, strips out mix shift. It's just volumes, cases out the door, or volumes sold. Look at that, 0.5%, 0.5%. It's consistently weak. I guess that's the only positive thing one could say about it. So when you think about food and beverage companies reporting their quarterly sales and they talk about growth in net sales, they're talking about sales revenue. So the only way they're generating 2 or 3% or 4% sales growth with no unit volume growth is through what? Pricing. Well, the ability to raise prices is becoming increasingly more difficult given the deflationary commodity environment. So the lazy and easy way for companies to raise prices had been, well, let's just see, commodities are going up, so we're going to raise our prices. That's going to cover our costs, and it's going to boost our margins. It's going to make our net sales more attractive. Not anymore. You have to figure out other ways to generate appropriate and consistent revenue growth. Something else that's occurring, and this has nothing to do with the operational aspect of the commercial aspect of the business, but the role that activists are playing in their increasing influence, impact on all companies, regardless of the industry. Investors are rewarding cost-cutting and financial engineering. When you think about 3G taking over Burger King, 3G taking over Heinz, and then merging with Kraft, their number one tool, besides acquisition and making money through the cost synergies, is cutting costs. So think about they're rewarding cost-cutting and financial engineering. What can we get off our books? How can we restructure our capital? How can you buy back shares? Everything unrelated to building a business. And what does this do? For marketers, for CEOs, for senior leaders, if you're out there trying to win in the marketplace or gain market share, it promotes risk aversion to business investment. Don't do something, it might not work. And that's the pressure and the voice that activists have. It's also taking an approach, sell underperforming assets. Don't think you can build them or get them back on track. And by all means, do not buy anything. It could be a bad acquisition. It could fail. So there's a risk aversion that's putting undue pressure on boards and on management to try to get the price of the stock up. Yet, despite this weak economic environment, absence of real volume growth, inability to raise prices, activists saying don't do something, it may not work, look at what investors are saying about the industry. This is food and beverage companies, stock market, or TSR, total shareholder return, which is stock price appreciation plus dividends reinvested in the stock. So it's a good picture of the return on the investment. S&P 500 was up 100% over this close to decade. Yet the food and beverage companies are outperforming the S&P 500 by 76 percentage points. So they're doing well. But at some point, it's a great quote from the economist Herb Stein, things that can't go on forever eventually stop. At some point, they have to return to marketplace fundamentals. And that's what we're going to spend the rest of the time that we have talking about how to build your business, how to build your brands, and how marketing plays such an integral role in that. So marketplace fundamentals must improve. However, you heard it earlier today, there's a new world order, and the realities need to be addressed. Let's look at some of those. As you think about business strategy, there's really only two basic questions that one needs to answer: where to compete and how to compete. Where to compete, which markets, which geography, where do you think you have the greatest opportunity to be successful? And how to compete is, learned this years ago and it still is relevant today, product differentiation or services could be a product, and market segmentation. So let's see what's happening. Mark talked about it. Consumers no longer come to us. We must go to them. Bless you. They no longer come to us. We must go to them. It's a far different world from, we had 3 networks to buy ads on. We had 7 women's magazines to advertise food. And we had every single one of you walk down an aisle or aisles of a grocery store to shop. Not so easy, because the world doesn't look like that anymore. Mobile shopping's increased 3 times to $31 billion. By 2019, it's estimated that e-commerce will represent 12% of the sales. I believe that is a woefully low estimate. Shrinking retail base. Every time a retailer has their quarterly earnings call, their quarterly results, what do they talk about? Closing stores, closing stores, closing stores. And why is that? Because we're all shopping in ways other than going to a retail outlet. Scale is no longer sustainable competitive advantage, meaning scale, having large factories, having a large sales force, having great information, having a large fixed media budget is no longer a sustainable competitive advantage. It's a comparative competitive advantage because information is scale agnostic. We can learn so much about our users. They can learn so much about us relatively free and very, very quickly. And here's the punchline. 20 years ago, the only personalized item we received at home was a bill. And you think about all the messages, and the panel talked about it, and at some point, what mode is one in? Receiving mode, buying mode, or leave me alone mode? And that's the challenge for marketers. So all marketers, regardless of products or services, must adapt to win. Let's think about some implications. There's 4 that I'm going to highlight quickly. Omni-channel brand building and engagement. Omni-channel simply means, what are all the avenues that I have to communicate with my consumers and hope they communicate with me? But here's the way to think about it. As marketers, we sometimes follow the traditional approaches that we've used for so long. So think about you as a consumer. How do you engage with the brands that you buy, that you use, that you pursue? And are you marketing in the same way that you are being marketed to? And think about that, and that'll change the way you think about building your brands. Flexible supply chain. Anybody enjoy Haagen-Dazs ice cream? You can raise your hand. It's all part of a well-balanced diet. There you go. Haagen-Dazs hasn't produced a pint of ice cream in over 20 years. And a flexible supply chain means, can we find somebody who has greater capabilities, can do it at a faster speed, at a lower cost, so we can focus on the things that matter? How do I engage with the customers? How to design the product? How do I market the product? So in the old days, 2 years ago, or maybe 20 years ago, outsourcing was a 4-letter word. Nobody wanted to outsource. Now be very smart about those opportunities to find others who have the scale, the skill, and the capabilities that you no longer can invest in, nor do you want to, even if you had the money to invest in. That's going to come up later in a couple of more slides. Salesforce's brand builder. For those of you who are in marketing or are going into marketing, how do you use your sales force? Do you use them to help build your brand with customers and help you understand how their customers are winning? Or is it simply, here's marketing's programs, go execute that? That latter way is not going to work. Retailers, partner, and competitor. And that's not simply because of the growth in private label, and private label offerings are far more attractive, relevant, and interesting to consumers than they were. But retailers, they're trying to build a relationship with each of us. Our brands may be a conduit for that or an enabler for that. But the retailer, yes, it's a partner to a certain extent. They're far more interested in building store loyalty, and we're far more interested in building brand loyalty. So when you think about all this, and my wife Susan is right over there, and Susan said this morning, talk slowly. I go, nah, don't talk slowly. So here's the deal. You can read even faster than I can talk. And if you've read this slide, it says, We all have the same facts. We have the same data. We go to the same conferences. We talk to have used the same consultants. Yet, the differential in success rate is enormous. It's because how each of you interprets that. Every one of you who will sit through all of the sessions today will have heard the same information, seen the same visuals, yet the way in which you interpret it, the way in which you would apply it will be very unique to you, and some will be successful and some less so. So think about that, because in the CPG industry, all the strategies are eerily similar. Why is that? We're marketing to the same consumers, and we're selling essentially through the same retailers. So if you ever see all the strategy statements that come out from an investor day, an investor presentation, they look very similar. I've never seen a strategy fail in a boardroom. It all comes down to superior execution. And that is the enduring competitive advantage, and that's why when we get to the end, we talk about leadership. That's the secret ingredient to superior execution. It's ability, discipline, and unswerving commitment to win in the marketplace, no matter the external headwinds, or particularly as marketers, the internal naysayers. Or if they're activists, they're the external naysayers. And what does it require? Insights, innovation, and leadership. We all talk about being awash with data, and how many of us are capable day in and day out to convert that data into insights where we can apply it. And then innovation, we'll spend some time about that, and all roads lead to leadership. So what's the role of marketing? Let's get to something a little closer to home in terms of what you're here for. It's to deliver a superior value proposition to consumers and customers. And I will always combine the two, to consumers and customers. It doesn't matter whether the customer is a retailer, bricks and mortar, or not. It's thinking about how to deliver a superior value proposition. And internally, it's providing the connective tissue between the company and the marketplace. The eyes and ears of the marketplace is the role of the marketer. And being able to communicate that internally so that you wind up winning externally, that's the role of marketing. So the CMO must deliver against 3 success criteria. Alignment. As an individual, ensure your goals and your group's goals are aligned with and support the company and the CEO. It's great to have wonderful marketing plans and know all these things about the consumer, but unless it's aligned with what your company and your CEO are trying to accomplish, very seldom will you be successful. Engage across the business, not just within your function or area of responsibility. And Denise talked about this earlier on in terms of, well, marketing is very attractive and people want to be part of it, but there's also, what do those marketers do? Well, I'm not real certain they do average. What do they do? So as a marketer, and particularly as a CMO, go spend time with operations, spend time with finance. Make sure, at a minimum, you're engaged heavily with R&D. So make sure people understand that you're engaging across the business, because what you're trying to do is create value across the business, not just within the function, and must be viewed as a business leader, not just the marketing expert. And third, keep your skill and your group's impact relevant in a very dynamic environment. What you don't want is to have your group outsourced. And as every budget, every area, every function's being challenged, marketing in particular needs to show how they are clearly adding value. Let's look at the relationship between the CEO and marketing overall. Strong advocate for marketing with a capital M. Remember that, because I'm going to get back to capital M or big M in a moment. It's a source of competitive advantage, not simply a function. And the CEO must ensure that marketing is well represented at the table. He or she provides a clear leadership role. And it's who's in this role or who's not in this role that reinforces the CEO's commitment to the role. So if the CEO comes from a marketing background broadly, then there's good credibility, and then that CEO can be a strong advocate for marketing as a set of capabilities, not just the marketing department. talked about outsourcing. I want to put in the context of the value chain defining all businesses. It doesn't matter whether it's a service or a product, but this is the value chain. It's a simple way to think about it. Creates the front end. Could be new product development. Could be marketing research. How do I understand what demand I'm trying to satisfy? That's on the create side. Make is the production or the conversion. Move is obviously distribution. And market is selling to consumers and to retailers. Make and move are the cost drivers. From there, one's looking for competitive insulation. So right away, when you start to think about the cost drivers, you should also think about, are there opportunities to capture value and extract value from the cost drivers? So you think about ways I can invest, because where the money comes from, where the value comes from is on the create side and the market side. And then value creators is where you establish competitive advantage, and that's one where you very unlikely that you will choose to outsource or have somebody else do that, because that's what the inherent understanding of what it takes to win. I talked about Big M, and I'm going to distinguish between little m and big M and then give you an example. A little m refers to the function of marketing. It's a discrete set of activities or processes required to market a product or service. It could be new product development. It could be packaging. It could be pricing. Very discrete activities, but not thought of in a holistic, how do we win in the marketplace. Big M encompasses all the elements required to win with consumers and customers, and it requires leadership across the enterprise and a general manager orientation. So think of the Big M as a business orientation, and little m is we're a department and a function, and we hand things off to other departments. Let me give you a good example. Lunchables, been around for quite some time, and it was created to solve the age-old dilemma that parents wanted to make sure their kids went to school with a healthy, nutritious lunch that they'd also enjoy. Kids aren't going to eat stuff they don't want to. And what did kids find? Kids found lunches boring. So here was sliced meats from Oscar Mayer. Here was sliced cheese from Kraft. Both of those were scale businesses, high-performance factories. And they said, wait a minute, there's an opportunity to combine those into a value-added lunch for kids. But here's what happened, and here's where marketing had to show leadership. Packaging and assembling of Lunchables cost more than the raw material. Try telling operations and try telling the finance department you want to spend more on packaging and people sticking the stuff together than the product itself. Yet marketing was armed with the insights of why consumers found this to be very compelling, and marketing had to sell this across the organization to operations. So we're going to slow down the lines. We're going to put extra people on the lines to package it, and the input cost is going to be far greater than you've had. To the sales force, you have to go to your customers and say, well, you used to buy sliced American cheese from Kraft and Oscar Mayer sliced meats at these price points. Here's something that's going to be terrific, yet it's going to cost X% or X times more. And they had to go to finance and say, guess what, we're going to make money. It turned out to be $1 billion platform, one of the most successful new product entries and subsequent platforms in the past several decades. In fact, to show you just how successful Lunchables has been, I'm the only person who ever worked at Kraft who does not claim to have invented it. So, let me talk a little bit more about new products, because it's also relevant regardless of the industry, although I'm obviously focused on my experience from CPG, but 80% of new products failed 30 years ago, 80% of new products failed 20 years ago, 80% of new products failed 10 years ago, 80% of new products probably fail today, and who knows? We'll let somebody else figure out the next 20 years. Here's some work that IRI has put together for its clients. There were 12,000 new brands or new SKUs introduced in 2015. Only 200 achieved what IRI characterizes as a new product performance status, which could be levels of sales or ACV distribution. Only 9 achieved sales of greater than $100 million. That's less than 0.1%. It is tough to be successful in new products, and here's why. So we gave you little m and big M. We're now giving you little I and big I. Big I for innovation is breakthrough innovation. Lunchables is a great example of big I. Consumers and customers will pay for big I. It's a step function change in benefits. It satisfies need states that have not been satisfied before, and people get it. Little innovation could be flavors, sizes, different new varieties. And while marketers will say we're being very innovative because we're introducing all these new items, it's little I. And consumers and retailers will not pay for little I. And that's one of the key reasons why so many new products fail, because we as marketers believe it's big I and charge accordingly, not appropriately, and consumers and retailers say not so fast. Here's one of the reasons why new product success is so elusive. Everybody know what a Swiffer is? Anybody have a Swiffer? I love my Swiffer. Swiffers are great. I can assure you none of us woke up and said we need a new mop. So how did Procter & Gamble think about Swiffers? It's not just, well, the data says, because if you don't like a brand you're using, why are you using it? And it's hard to articulate to a market researcher, here's why I don't like the brand I'm using. Then you might want to say, well, why am I using the brand? Here's something that's very new in terms of what's happening in the marketplace. And give you 3 types of brands to think about: Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Tier 1, in keeping with the Dow Jones historical perspective, could be viewed as old economy. Large brands, scale brands, ubiquitous distribution, have always competed on scale, or what we've referred to as mass muscle and ubiquity. And then there's Tiers 2 and Tier 3s, 2 very distinct differences. So Tier 2 can be the number 2 or number 3 brands in a category, small, heretofore subscale, maybe spotty distribution, and at times considered orphan brands that companies now, because investors say you have all these brands that don't make any money or aren't growing, get rid of them. Let me tell you what happened. I'll show you an example of what happened. And then Tier 3 are the ones that are new. You may only buy them online. You may find them only in Costco. A lot of exciting things happens there. But Tier 2 and Tier 3 are winning because they don't have that legacy infrastructure and processes. They're not backward looking in terms of here's how we had won in the marketplace decade after decade after decade. They're unencumbered by that. They think about, my consumer has a smartphone. How do I learn from him or her, and how do I communicate, and how do I sell it online? Far more liberating than I have this dated and very expensive infrastructure. And I've already made this point a couple of times. Access to consumers is no longer limited by lack of scale. We can communicate with our consumers anywhere, anytime, and most important, they can do so with us. So it's dramatically changing how we create demand and then how we fulfill it. Here's an example of Tier 2. It's prestige brands. Look at some of those brands. These are brands that, I'm just looking at the screen here. Luden's Cough Drops, Comet Cleanser, Nitol Sominex. I think they either help you sleep or help you go to bed. I don't know what they do, or stay up. BC Powder. So these were cast-offs by so many different companies, yet Prestige said there are still relevant brands to relevant segments of consumers, and Prestige has done an extremely good job taking what others have cast off and made them relevant again. So there's an old expression, there are no tired brands, there are only tired brand managers, and I think Prestige has proven that. Tier 3, Kind. Anybody use Kind bars? Terrific platform that they have built and are building, and very smart about where they started and not worried so much about let's go into the traditional grocery stores, let's go to where the shoppers are in the high growth, what we used to call or classify as alternative channels. They are now growth channels. Dollar Shave Club. Dollar Shave Club is giving Gillette and others fits. Dollar Shave Club has 3 million members. Well, for those who have toiled in an industry where one was looking for 70, 80, or 90% household penetration, 3 million members doesn't sound like much. But Dollar Shave Club knows every one of them and can engage with every one of them and can build a relationship with every one of them. So Tier 2 and Tier 3, and here's the last example. I don't know what the name is. What is it? Is it I love you? Is it I and love and you? I don't get it. But these are pet products, and people will do anything for their pets, and this is high end. And larger pet food companies, and won't name any of them, but you know them, they didn't want to get into this high-end segment because they wanted to protect their base. Think of that way, as opposed to here's a high-growth opportunity, and this company is doing extremely well. So wrapping up this section, it's increasing the odds, and while it refers to new products, it really refers to and helps on building brands, again, whether they are hard goods or services. Learn from the past, don't live in it. And you think about what your company is good at, yet have to be able to look past that to where are the opportunities to learn and grow and do a much better job building your brands and being stuck in, well, here's how we've always done it. Understand the true sources of competitive advantage. Every time we have this discussion, you'll ask somebody, what's your brand or your company's competitive advantages? You'll get a list. You can't have a list. You can't have that many competitive advantages unless you're a monopoly. If you can come up with one or two, then you truly have an advantage business. Insight-driven consumer and customer marketing. We are awash with data, and you ask somebody about their brand or their marketplace or their consumers, you will get an unbelievable litany of facts. Those are not insights. They will not help you do something differently the next day. And so insight-driven consumer and customer marketing. Maintain a foot in the familiar. A good friend of mine, Jim Kiltz, who was CEO of Kraft, Nabisco, and Gillette, had a great expression, and it ties into this and says you can go a long way staying close to home. We all believe as marketers that our brands can travel further than we think we can. That's another reason 80% of new products fail, because we believe the brand can be extended far further than consumers will accept it being extended. And we always think we can do well by going into an adjacency. Well, look, we did these concentric circles, and we're very strong here. We just need to go out here. Your adjacency is someone else's core. So think about that. And they're not interested in having you come in and dabble. So adjacencies are not for tourists. Realize that neither brands nor leaders are energy neutral. I'll talk more about that in a moment. So I'm going to talk more about that now. Leadership. Everybody has their thoughts on leadership. I'll give you one definition that I've found very valuable is leadership is the willingness to make the tough calls when it's not so obvious that they need to be made. It could be shutting down a factory, could be selling off a business, it could be having to restructure or an organization, and employees might go, well, things are going well, this business is doing well, I don't get it, the factory's running it close to capacity. So it's a willingness to make the tough calls when it's not so obvious that they need to be made. 7 principles of leadership. Each of you will have your own. Hopefully these will resonate. Articulate, communicate, and inculcate a vision and strategic direction. And that means over and over and over communicate what you're trying to accomplish. And it's not just from a CEO's perspective or a CMO's perspective. It could clearly be from a team leader. It could be from someone running the Walmart team for your business. So leadership it runs up and down the organization. This is not, well, I'm going to be a leader when I get promoted to blank. Well, you're not going to get promoted to blank unless you've shown that type of leadership. And many times now it's an informal leadership. We've gone from command and control to collaboration and cooperation, and that's a good thing. So you have to be mindful of what that leadership means. And they spoke about it at the panel, transform the complex into the simple. Dave West, a good friend of mine who succeeded me as CEO of the Hershey Company, he used to say, how do we get the same thing on 13,000 people's to-do list? So strategies can be complex because we make them, but think about the message of what you're trying to accomplish cascading through the organization. So the person working on a brand, calling on a customer, running a production facility, trying to find you some warehouse capabilities, they understand what the company is trying to accomplish. Enable, then empower. For years in the CPG industry, the sales force said, we understand the customer better than you do, give us the trade funds. Give us the trade promotion dollars, we know how to spend them better than you do. Well, you tried that. They didn't know what to do because they hadn't been enabled, meaning they hadn't been training, they hadn't built the capabilities. So while we all want to empower and be empowered, Enabling has to come prior to that. Cultivate versatility and leadership style as a CMO, and you have a group of 8. Sometimes you're one of 8, sometimes it's 1 plus 7. You need to understand when that leadership style is appropriate to make the decision or to sit there and ensure everybody gets on the same page. Disciplined allocation of resources, people, and dollars. Recognize and foster a stretched versus a stressed organization. What's stretched for one will be stressed for the other. So stretched is good, stressed isn't, but people react in different ways. You have to be mindful about that. That's why leadership is the secret ingredient, and that's why EQ, emotional quotient, is every bit as important as IQ in terms of what it takes to be a successful leader. My favorite one, do you create energy or do you sap energy? Every day we wake up, we have 2 decisions to make. Are we going to create energy as a leader, or are we going to sap energy? If you're an optimist, people will be about as optimistic as you are. If you are a pessimist, I will assure you they will be more pessimistic than you are. So think about that. 4 basic questions around leadership and your role as a leader, and as our roles as being led. What motivates you? Who do you motivate? We're probably pretty good at answering the question, who do we annoy? Or maybe who annoys us, but who do we motivate? From whom do you learn? Throughout your career, throughout my career, there can always point to people from whom you can learn, or whom you did learn, and who or what do you teach? So I've talked a lot about marketing, the role of CMO, the challenges facing the CPG industry, what it takes to win in new products, value chain, et cetera. Here's an interesting or humorous way to think about how to wrap up some of this. I can't tell you how many times I've heard CMOs or CEOs say, "My business isn't very good, it's our category. If our category were growing," blame it on the category. Dog ate the category. Blame it on the category. If our category were growing, we'd be a lot more successful. Well, let's debunk that myth. Nothing's more basic and almost commodity-oriented than a basic phone. I think Apple's done okay. I don't think they're blaming it on the category. Coffee. You just drink a regular cup of coffee? No, I think Starbucks has done a good job redefining that. Running shoes, basketball shoes, tennis shoes, get those anywhere you want. Nike's built a huge business. It's not the category, it's our ability to win in the category. We're going to end where we started. It all started with a mouse 70 years ago. Walt Disney Company still going strong. Talk about staying relevant. Thank you all very much.
We have time for a couple of questions.
By the clock on the wall, we have time for questions about anything I've covered or anything career-wise or anything else.
Thanks, sorry. I got the cheap seats, excuse me. I and Love and You is actually a Boulder-based brand, and I live out there, and the natural foods industry is on fire. The multiples for acquisition are crazy. So I think that speaks to what you were saying in terms of innovation, disruption. But it's these state-old companies that are buying them, Pinnacle Foods, some of the others that are trying to bring the innovation in-house. The fear is always that they will crush that innovation and then have to repeat the cycle. How do they break that?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the...
How do they break the cycle of finding innovative companies, bringing them in-house, and then oftentimes, as is the case, that innovation gets quashed in the long run?
Don't bring them in. And I don't mean to be sarcastic, but that's the age-old dilemma of, did Kellogg's leave Kashi alone? Yes, and look how well Kashi has performed. There's a couple of companies in which I've been involved. We said, leave them alone. Give them the resources when they ask, not foist them upon them because you have some cost synergies that one needs to extract, or we're so smart to buy you, now we're even smarter to figure out how you can grow. The other part of your question is the large companies, tier one companies, are paying exorbitant multiples because they can't generate growth internally, so they are buying growth. Yet when they pay 15, 20, 25 times multiple on profits for the acquisition, once they brought it in-house, it gets down to 7 or 8 times. So it winds up being a very attractive purchase for them. But your question is much more relevant in terms of truly having the discipline to say we're going to let you operate independently, learn from you, as opposed to we're from corporate and we're here to help. Good question. Thank you.
Outstanding presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really enjoyed that. The one brand we haven't mentioned in the room, and I just wanted to get your just very general take on, is Amazon.
Yep.
Because you talked about price out of the equation, and I'm a retailer, and just watching them drill price down and really not turning a profit, it's a challenge. So just wonder what your take. And
well, that is the biggest disruption, and that if I can, through tablet, phone, or desktop, buy something instantaneously, shop instantaneously, and not have to get out of my environment, that is the biggest challenge. And every brand, I think when I said marketing to brands want to get, how do I get into Amazon? That's about how do I get to a consumer. So a retailer has to figure out a way. Is there let me do another example. Those tier 2 brands have found a way to communicate and keep their loyal consumer base. And the large retailers, I don't know which one you're with, but it doesn't matter. The large retailers are having a hard time doing that. They're working on store formats. They need to work on the customer experience and the shopper experience to connect with the consumer more than worry about the legacy infrastructure that we've been saddled with. So, thank you. Just one back. Yep.
So you have a really good view across the CPG industry,
Yeah.
and if you're talking to a group of marketers here, where would you tell young, energetic marketers who want to lead and want to make a difference or transform brands, where would you go? Would you go to a big classical CPG? Would you go to a private equity? Would you go to a startup? Where are the opportunities to really make a difference?
It's a great question. We have a few who might be interested in it in this first row. I would say within the past 5 years, I've switched. I would have said, go get the classic marketing training. Go to one of the big companies, and it's classic marketing training which will serve you well through your career. I don't know if I'd do that today. I don't know if I'd go into private equity, because it's a financial model-driven industry much more so than capabilities and commercialization and operational excellence. I would say I'd go to tier 2 or tier 3. It's going to be hands-on, going to understand consumers much better because of the speed by which they operate, and you won't be looking backwards. They're looking forward. You make a lot more mistakes, but there's going to be more of a benefit to having gone to a startup and been part of the entire business system than for someone to say I was classically trained somewhere. Having said that, either one's a great place to start. I mean, the advice I would give, it depends on the company, but I'm more inclined to go towards the smaller, faster-moving, the much more consumer-facing companies. So thank you very much. Yes. Yeah. Right behind you.
Oh, awesome. Thanks. Do you think that Big M marketing is enough to bring the struggling CPG companies back to relevance, or do you think that they're kind of a lost cause at this point, need to look toward R&D or something else that will kind of make them relevant again and bring consumers back to the center of the supermarket?
I think that the challenge for CPG companies is, and it sounds very simplistic, is to stop thinking like a CPG company. And that's the challenge, because we have these assets. We have this infrastructure. We have these capabilities that have worked forever that no longer do that. So I believe, maybe because I've been one, as a marketer, that they can get the company to, use the word transform. Very few companies transform. And I'll give you a great example. Sean Connolly is a new CEO of Conagra Brands, and Sean's been the CEO for about a year and a half. He's well on the path to transforming that company, because it's also the leadership that says we can grow. We're going to get rid of things we can't grow. We're going to acquire some things that help us grow, but we're going to better understand how to win. So company by company, it can happen. So, one more or no more? All right. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.